Unitarian and Universalist traditions are rooted in Christianity. Over the years, we have come to embrace a wide variety of beliefs. But today, on Easter morning, we return to our roots. The Gospel of John reports that Jesus said to his disciples, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these." Jesus was the beginning, not the end. The structure of the Gospel of John is different than the other Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because basically they follow the same outline. Mark is the shortest Gospel and perceived by many to be the earliest. And Matthew and Luke follow the pattern and then add their own material. Matthew, for instance, has Jesus preach the Sermon on the Mount, like a new Moses coming down from the mountain. But instead of giving 10 commandments, he gives 9 blessings known as the Beatitudes. Now, Luke has a similar sermon in his gospel, but he remembers Jesus giving it on the plain, on the same level as the people. And instead of saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," Luke reports Jesus as saying, "Blessed are the poor," indicating Jesus' concern for the actual physically poor people. Also in Luke's version of this sermon, he reports Jesus saying, "Woe to the rich," showing that Jesus was a revolutionary out to change the social order. Now, these are not necessarily contradictions. It's perfectly possible and probably likely that Jesus gave various versions of the same sermon in various places. But the gospel writers made choices about what to write down. And this gives the scholars clues to each writer's bias or purpose. The author of the Gospel of Matthew really wants to present Jesus as the new Moses, whereas Luke is very much concerned with social justice and caring for the poor. John reports different stories and sayings of Jesus than Mark and Luke, and he is clear about his bias in purposes. Towards the end of his book, he writes, "Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written so you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." And so he has this sense of Jesus bringing something new. And before Jesus told his disciples that they would do greater things than he's reported as saying, "It is the Father living in me who is doing his work." And that points to a kind of a Unitarian view of Jesus, where Jesus is not claiming to be God, but the fact that God is working through him. And that is the general meaning of the Unitarian version of Christianity. And believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe the evidence of the work themselves. And he goes on to say, when he says that he is one with the Father, that the disciples are one with him. And so that the divinity is not particular to Jesus, but something that is shared among all human beings, and that we should all act out our own divinity. So what are these works of Jesus that John reports? And have his disciples exceeded him in greatness? Now, John includes some of the same miracles found in the other Gospels, such as feeding the 5,000, which I think my mother or some other wise person explained to me that the real miracle was that people were probably hoarding food and they decided to share instead of hoarding. And that's a miracle that all of us are capable of doing. And it's something that we have the technological ability, even though the population has grown so incredibly since Jesus' time. So has our scientific knowledge and our ability to feed the people. We have the technology. Now we need the spiritual miracle of teaching each other to share. And that is our task to do. Walking on water. Well, those of you who live here along the coast know that people jet ski across the water. They water ski across water. Some of you even live on boats. The idea of living on water has certainly been conquered by technology. And giving sight to the blind. How many of us are wearing eyeglasses that were not possible in Jesus' day? This is a common everyday miracle that we don't even call it a miracle. And even procedures such as sending laser beams into our eyes, which seemed like science fiction when I was born, is now commonplace, and you can get it done at the local strip mall. To have your eye giving sight to the blind. But one story is told only in the Gospel of John, and that is the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Now, the Gospel of Mark has Jesus reviving a girl presumed to be dead, but Jesus said, she's not dead, she's only asleep, and then revives her. But John goes into detail. He says that Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days and was beginning to smell. Before the stone of the tomb was rolled away, Jesus proclaimed, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And then Lazarus was raised from the dead. Raising people from the dead. Have the disciples of Jesus exceeded Jesus in this task? I am here to testify that they have. 10 years ago, my wife died. Her heart stopped. And it was 30 minutes before they were able to start it. But even then, they did not fully revive her. Instead, they placed her in a medically induced hypothermic coma. They reduced her body temperature to around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the modern equivalent of the cold, dark tomb. On the 3rd day, she rose out of the coma and into consciousness. We explained what happened to her, and she proclaimed, weird. She had come back from the dead. And while she was sleeping, I walked the halls of the cardiac care unit. And room after room contained resurrection after resurrection. An everyday medical miracle, possibly happening right now at our local hospital. And occurring many times across the nation. I imagine there are several here among us today who have been brought back from the dead. Many thank God, many thank science, many thank whatever holiness produced the human mind. we contain that miracle in this church. It's in the kitchen on top of the fridge. Some of us have had taken training, which is probably time for the safety committee to do another training about how to use the defibrillator. If one of us should die during this sermon, which would be very dramatic, but please don't. We could go and save their life. We all have that possibility, all have that capability. We live in a miraculous age. Gail now has a defibrillator implanted in her chest. And I've seen it work. It's kind of freaky. But she carries that miracle around with her. What wondrous works are these? I do not know if the medical practitioners and what percentage of you are followers of Jesus. But Jesus said, believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe the evidence of the works themselves. We live in a miraculous age. We catch more fish and feed more people than the disciples of Jesus could imagine. Miraculous people walk around us and we barely notice. Did Jesus know the secret of coming back from the dead? Was the resurrection of Lazarus a dry run for his own resurrection? The Passover Plot, a controversial best-selling book of 1965 by British scholar Hugh Schoenfield, suggests that he did. And this reminds me of a 1990 movie called Flatlanders, starring a very young Kiefer Sutherland and Julie Roberts and Kevin Bacon, about medical students who experiment with dying and being brought back to life. Or perhaps it was unintentional. Perhaps Jesus was removed from the cross prematurely, and the coolness of a cave produced a hypothermic coma, allowing his body to recover. Or maybe it was God raising Lazarus or Jesus from the dead. None of us were there. None of us truly know. All we have is faith and conjecture. But we can at least believe the works themselves. Something happened long ago that impressed the disciples of Jesus. And it is still happening today in greater numbers. And that impresses me. What should we do with our extended lives? We are given second chance after second chance to get to know each other, to get to love each other. In local papers, they sometimes show pictures of 5-generation families. And some of you might even exist. Some of you might be great-great-grandparents who held their great-great-grandchild. Think of how rare that was even 50 years ago. My great-grandmother held my brother, but died 2 years before I was born. We are living longer, but are we living better? What are we doing to share from generation to generation? And what happened to these people after they were brought back from the dead? Gail and I enjoy a pop song, kind of an obscure song called Dig Yourself. Lazarus, dig yourself. And And Lazarus is living in a flat, New York flat that's mostly occupied by junkies. And he's saying, I didn't ask to be raised from the dead. And he's stranded in modern New York City. The Gospels have different versions of what happened to Jesus in this resurrection. Yeah. Luke and some versions of Mark say that he rose to heaven. John simply has Jesus saying, follow me, but then gives no indication of where he went. And Matthew has Jesus returning to the mountaintop proclaiming, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. My favorite resurrection story, among the many that are in there, is about the road to Emmaus, where these two disciples meet a stranger. And the stranger seems to be able to tell them all sorts of things about Jesus, even though they're grieving and that he's dead. And they invite the stranger to stay on and not travel any farther. And when the stranger breaks bread with them, disappears. And this idea is that we know the resurrection of Jesus when we welcome the stranger and share our food and shelter with them. It is in the works. It is in the works of sharing with the stranger and sharing our bread that the real resurrection of Jesus is known. In recent generations, there's been lots of movies about people coming back from the dead, but they tend to be zombies. Zombies are not the resurrection, and we don't have a zombie Jesus somewhere walking around. Resurrection is more than resuscitation. It is the essence that is still present with all of us when we share to give and to love. Let us live as if there are miracles and signs in the work we do, for there are. From the doctor with incredible expertise to the housekeeper in the hospital who is from Ghana, who prayed over Gail after cleaning her room. All were involved in her healing. We do live lives beyond our understanding. A kind word, a helpful gesture, deeds great and small, revive those around us, and giving them strength to share wisdom and love. May this Easter remind us to look for everyday resurrection. May we find these resurrections and receive them gratefully and give them liberally, sharing what we have, giving our lives to a future unknown. Our ancestors are with us always, and we will be here always, even until the end of time. May we bless and be blessed.